And this is from our next speaker this afternoon, Rob Skiba. He is the creator-writer of the forthcoming science fiction internet television series, Seed, and the author of the non-fiction book, Babylon Rising, The First Shall Be Last. He is an award-winning documentary filmmaker, entrepreneur, published author, artist, keynote speaker, motivational coach, trainer, teacher, Army veteran, former missionary, and an active member of 3 charitable organizations, serving on several boards of directors. He is a graduate of the Hollywood Film Institute. Rob Skiba's lifelong dream has been to produce powerful television and motion picture productions that will touch lives and expand the kingdom of God. He's happily married. He has a teenage son. He lives in Texas. I mean, there's that too. And Rob, of course, has been a guest in the past on the Prophecy in the News programs. Those shows did very, very well. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to let Rob tell you the secret of the scroll. Welcome to the stage.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. The secret of the scroll. Well, that is a special item that I've been giving to people who've had an influence on my life in leading me in the direction that I'm on right now with all the research and everything that I'm doing. And it has within it the pilot episode of Seed. It's a script inside of it. And so Tom and a few others have that. I've been able to give that to them. As Tom mentioned, I'm actively involved in several ministries. I am the co-founder of Kingsgate Media, along with my wife Sheila, who's I think somewhere over here. Yes, give her a round of applause. She needs it for putting up with me. Are you guys excited about this weekend? Yeah. Man, I'll tell you what, I'm jacked out of my mind. I mean, this is incredible, and I want to publicly thank Tom Horn and Bob Ulrich and Gary Stearman for this opportunity. What an honor and a privilege it is to stand here. I mean, I'm still pinching myself. It's pretty incredible. You've heard a lot of people talking about the last days. How many of you think we're there? Yeah, you've heard different opinions, different ideas that people have regarding the last days, and some of the characters like Petrus Romanus, the false prophet, who the Antichrist might be. You heard Chris Putnam talking about, for centuries, people pointed to the Vatican for a potential Antichrist. I'm going to share my opinion on it. I consider myself, I am a filmmaker by trade, but I consider myself to be a researcher by hobby. And that came out primarily out of the result of doing documentary films for almost 20 years. And I consider myself to be a researcher, and by that I mean I research that which has been searched by others before me. Interestingly enough, many of those others are presenting here this weekend, so it's pretty incredible. So I'm going to share with you a few things this afternoon. This is not "Thus saith the Lord." This is "Thus thinketh Rob," to coin the King James, right? So I'm going to encourage you to search these things out for yourself. How many of you remember playing Connect the Dots when you were younger? I loved doing the Connect the Dot things, and that's basically what I've tried to do as a researcher. I'm not about plagiarizing anybody else's material. I'm simply trying to research what other people have searched before me and try to connect some dots for myself and then share it with you. So that's my hope today. I imagine that there's going to be essentially 3 different responses in a crowd this size. Response number 1, some of you are going to just listen to what I have to say and say, wow, isn't that interesting? You're going to walk out and that'll be about it. You go to the next speaker. There's going to be another group in here that's going to say, Rob, you need to buy stock in tinfoil and go into the hat-making business. You're going to think I'm totally crazy and off my rocker and, just conspiracy nutcase. And then there's going to be a third group here that's going to search and see if these things be true. And that is my hope, that is my desire, is that all of you will take notes, the things that I'm going to say, and that you will research that which I have searched, and search these things out for yourself. You've probably heard a lot of people talking about this scripture right here, Matthew 24:37, as it was in the days of Noah, so shall it be at the coming of the Son of Man. That scripture has always intrigued me because Jesus' disciples came to him and asked him, what's it going to be like in the last days? And Jesus gives a pretty long list of things to describe the last days, doesn't he? But after he finishes that long list, he throws this one in. And if you look at the prior list, there's always been wars and rumors of wars and pestilence and earthquake. You know, varying measures. Of course, it's increasing in these days. But I started to think about this phrase right here and wondered, well, why does he say that? What differentiates the days of Noah from any other time in human history? And I used to think there was only one thing, but now I think there are two things that differentiates the days of Noah from any other time in human history. And the first one is what I call the Genesis 6 experiment. And that's summed up in Genesis chapter 6, of course, verses 1 through 12. Some interesting activity that takes place there that resulted in the creation of Nephilim hybrids. And by that, I'm referring to both angel-human hybrids as well as, I believe, animal-human hybrids. And I talk about that in some length in these DVDs right here. I'll be talking about it tomorrow morning in the breakout session on the Archon invasion and the return of the Nephilim. Interesting thing about that is if you've been following the news on the animal-human hybrid side of things, what are we seeing? Lots of it. In fact, last year when we were in this building for the Future Congress, they had announced 150 chimera produced in the UK last year. So this is happening now. And that's one of the things that I think differentiated the days of Noah. And when you think about the days of Noah, you have to remember Noah lived 950 years. 600 years before the flood and 350 years after the flood. And a whole lot of weird and wild and crazy, wacky stuff happened on both sides of the flood. Which this was before the flood. Of course, there were Nephilim after the flood, we know, from reading through the scriptures. But then the other thing that I think differentiates the days of Noah from any other time in human history, over and above this, is the creation of what I call interdimensional portals, or in this case, a portal, that being the Tower of Babel. Now, the thing that I found intriguing about reading about the Tower of Babel in the scriptures is it doesn't appear to be about height. God didn't freak out when we built the World Trade Centers. Right? They didn't seem to be concerned with height either because they built it in the plains of Shinar. So if you're concerned with height, you're not going to build it in a valley, right? You're going to build it on top of a mountain. So they built it in a valley, in the plains of Shinar. I believe when it says that it could reach into heaven, it's talking about an interdimensional portal. We might call it something like a stargate, a way of bridging our world with that of the unseen world. And if you read some of what I call the synchronized, biblically endorsed, extra-biblical texts, you will see, like in the book of Enoch and Joshua and Jubilees, things like Nimrod's real plan, what he planned to do, was go in and assault God, kill God, and then set up their gods in the Holy of Holies. God was not happy with that idea. But what's interesting is it says, now whatever they imagined to do would not be restrained from them. So at least in theory, it appears that what they were planning to do, they can't kill God, but at least bridging our world with the other world seems to have been possible. So we know that God confounded the languages. That created what I call the man of many names. The Bible refers to him as Nimrod. Now, my work is building on the works of people like Alexander Hislop, the two Babylons, Tom Horn's book, Nephilim Stargates and Apollyon Rising, and a gentleman by the name of Peter Goodgame in his books, Red Moon Rising and the Giza Discovery. In those works, they detail how Nimrod became known by many other names, and it just makes sense. The whole world's gathered together in the plains of Shinar under one person. God confounds the languages. I believe it was 70 languages, 70 people groups went off in different directions. Man, something's going weird there. They went off in their different directions, all talking about the same guy, but now referring to him by different names. These are just a few that you see here. I'm going to focus primarily on 4 of them: Gilgamesh, Orion, Apollo, and Osiris. And I'm actually pretty excited about giving this presentation because I watched Tom Horn's presentation last night, and there were a number of things that he was not able to get to. And so you can think of this as kind of picking up where he left off, because I will talk about some of the things that he wasn't able to get to. And talk about the first shall be last. It's the subtitle of my book, Babylon Rising and the First Shall Be Last. That has a number of meanings. One, I believe the first Babylon, there's going to be another Babylon. The first shall be last. I believe it's also talking about the Antichrist. I believe that the first Antichrist will be the last Antichrist, and I believe that the first world order, the new world order, is nothing new about it. It's just a repeat of an order that was done in the days of Nimrod, I believe. So let's look at the scriptures. I began to think, if we're talking about the last days, Jesus himself said it's going to be a day like never before. There's never been a time like it, and there never will be a time again like the last days. So the scriptures say in Amos chapter 3 that God doesn't do anything except he tells his prophets first what he's going to do. So when I started to think about characters of the last days, I thought, is he really going to leave us hanging concerning the details of this end-time tyrant? Or is the scriptures going to tell us who he is? And I stepped off with that premise and researched some of the things that were searched by others before me, and came to the conclusion that the Bible absolutely tells you exactly who the Antichrist is by name. And so let's go through that. This is Revelation 17. The beast that thou sawest was and is not, and shall ascend out of the bottomless pit. Where does the beast come from? This is like those open book tests, remember in school? like geography. Find America, and you got a map with the words America written on it. Look, guys, I don't have any letters after my name. I have the Roman numeral 2 after my name because my parents didn't want to call me Junior. So I don't have any letters after my name, but I can read. And this says the Antichrist comes out of the bottomless pit. So he's not coming from Kenya? He's not coming from Hawaii? The Vatican, the European Union, the Arab League? We've all heard these theories, haven't we? I'm looking at that with an open book test saying, yeah, it says the bottomless pit. So that's where I think the beast is coming from. Go figure. It goes on to say the beast that was and is not and yet is. Well, that's interesting right there, because how is Jesus referred to in the beginning of Revelation? As the one who what? Was and is to come. So here we have an antithesis right here. Was and is to come, was and is not and yet shall be. Right off the bat, okay? Then the angel goes on to describe, it says, there are 7 kings, and that's an interesting word right there. That's basilius, if I'm pronouncing it right in Greek. It means kings, the head of a kingdom. A lot of prophecy teachers that I've listened to talk about the heads of the beasts in reference to kingdoms. Well, kings rule kingdoms, so I can understand that, but this is talking about individuals here, at least as I read it. And there are 7 kings, 7 individuals who rule over kingdoms. 5 are fallen, 1 is, and the other is not yet come. And when he cometh, he must continue a short space. And the beast that was and is not, even he is the 8th, and is of the 7, and goeth into perdition. So he's telling you there's 7 to choose from, and the Antichrist is going to be one of those 7. Right there. So let's keep looking. This is a list. We started trying to figure out, okay, who are the 5 that have fallen, who is the one that now is, and who could be the one that will come and his reign will be short. And I got this list again from the works of Peter Goodgame and others. And as I researched it for myself, I came to agree with what they were saying. So let's just analyze this a little bit. Let's look at the 5 that have fallen. Nimrod, arguably, he's obviously the first Antichrist, thought himself to be a god, tried to kill God, set up a one-world system. He certainly fits the description of an Antichrist. Pharaoh of Egypt at the time of the Exodus, thought himself a god, tried to wipe out God's people. Fits. Sennacherib of Assyria, thought himself a god, tried to wipe out God's people. Angel of the Lord shows up, says, I don't think so, wipes out like 170 or 180, something like that, 1,000 of his troops, sends them home packing, and his own sons killed him. King of Tyre is written about in the scriptures. It starts out talking about him as a man, but halfway through the narrative, it switches and starts talking about Lucifer. So clearly this guy had some kind of affiliation with the devil. Antiochus Epiphanes, this is in between the Old and New Testament time period. He's an individual who set up a statue of Zeus and offered up a pig in the temple. Some say that's a type of the abomination of desolation. So he fits, but I would say Alexander the Great is also a really good candidate as well, especially when you're reading in the book of Daniel. It describes the he-goat. And it says the he-goat has a great horn between his eyes. Go look it up. It says that the great horn is the first king. Well, looking at scriptures, who's the first king listed in the Bible? Nimrod. So apparently Alexander the Great did whatever he did, at least in that same type of spirit. The one that now is, well, that depends on when you think is. You know, it's like Clinton. What's the definition of is? When now is depends on when you think Revelation was written, whether it was an earlier date of Revelation or a later date. I could really go either way. I've heard some good arguments on both sides of it, but looking at the 2 individuals that could have been in that time period that is, we would see Nero and Domitian. Domitian thought himself a god, was a persecutor of God's people, and Nero would have candlelit dinners to the burning Christians. So both are pretty good candidates there. The one who will come and his reign will be short. I believe a really good case could be made for Adolf Hitler. I think a lot of people living at that time certainly thought he was the Antichrist. So if we subscribe to this list and we say that, okay, these are all good candidates, we've got to start narrowing it down. So let's keep looking through the scriptures. And bear in mind also that one of the titles used most for the Antichrist in the Old Testament is the word Assyrian, the Assyrian. So that's automatically going to eliminate a few of these guys, but let's look at Revelation 13. And I saw one of his heads, as it were, wounded to death, and his deadly wound was healed, and all the world wondered after the beast. So one of these guys has a mortal head wound. Well, Tom talked last night about the various names like Apollo and Osiris. Remember Osiris? Osiris is said to have been cut up into 14 pieces, only 13 of which were found. One of the pieces that was cut off, of course, was his head. So that fits under Osiris. The biblically endorsed extra-biblical text of Joshua says that it was Esau that cut off Nimrod's head with a sword. So Nimrod clearly had a mortal head wound. Pharaoh of Egypt did not. Sennacherib did not. King of Tyre did not. Antiochus Epiphanes and Alexander the Great, neither one of those guys did either. Nero is interesting because he stabbed himself in the throat, and so if we reckon that as part of the head, then maybe he could be a candidate. Domitian, it would not apply. Hitler is said to have supposedly shot himself in the head, though recent forensic evidence suggests otherwise, but that's a topic for another seminar altogether. So, again, remember, one of the Old Testament titles was the Assyrian. So looking at these three choices that we have left, which one of these guys is an Assyrian? Only one, Nimrod. Right, so let's continue. Revelation 13:4. And they worshiped the dragon, which gave power unto the beast, and they worshiped the beast, saying, Who is like unto the beast? Who is able to make war with him? One of the other characters Nimrod was known by was Gilgamesh. This is from the Epic of Gilgamesh. Who can compare with him in kingliness? Who can say like Gilgamesh, I am king? Very similar phrase there. Let's continue. When we're comparing, if we're going to say that he's an Antichrist, we got Jesus Christ and we got Antichrist. So let's go ahead and compare. We know that Jesus was both God and man, right? Well, Gilgamesh was said to have been 1/3 man and 2/3 God. So there's an interesting parallel. Osiris is the only other god of antiquity besides our God that was called the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords in the Book of the Dead. Osiris, Mithra, Tammuz, and others are all represented by the symbol of a cross. Many of you may not realize this, but Jesus was actually crucified on the favorite symbol of their god Mithra, which was a cross. So the Son of God was crucified on the symbol of the Son of God. Now, in this case, it's Osiris, represented by the Ankh. The top of the Ankh has a hoop on it. The hoop represents resurrection. Jesus is represented by the cross. He's represented as resurrection. So is Osiris and the Ankh. He is depicted in his various embodiments as a dying and resurrecting figure, the dying and resurrecting sun god of antiquity. Son of God, as Apollo, he's a son of Zeus. Right? So there's another parallel right there. And he rules from elsewhere. In this case, he rules from Hades, the direct opposite of heaven. Right? Our Lord's ruling from heaven, right? Osiris is ruling from the underworld. Very interesting parallels. So let's look at what's going on in the underworld. Where does the beast come from? The bottomless pit. Open book test, remember? All right. Revelation 9:11. And they had a king over them, which is the angel of the, oh, there it is again, the bottomless pit, whose name in the Hebrew tongue is Abaddon, but in the Greek tongue hath his name Apollyon, which is a derivative spelling of Apollo. The Bible just told you who the Antichrist is by name. Interestingly enough, it does so in Revelation 9:11. Don't have time to get into that here. I talk about a lot more in my book and my DVD series based on it. But 9/11 is a very interesting number for us as Americans, but just in general. 666, we talk about the mark of the beast, right? Number of the beast. I credit this to Sharon Gilbert. She spoke last year and talked about some interesting things regarding the carbon molecule. We are carbon-based organisms, right? The carbon molecule consists of 6 protons, 6 electrons, and 6 neutrons. So just by default, the number of man would be 666. Interesting. Now remember, he was 1/3 man and 2/3 God, Gilgamesh, right? What's 2/3 of 100? Oh, 66.6%. Huh. Interesting. The missing piece of Osiris was fashioned into an obelisk. I'm not going to elaborate much more than that. The biggest one in the world is in Washington, D.C. In more ways than one. Sorry. Did I say that? This particular one measures measures 6,666 inches tall, which is 555.5 feet tall, but some say there's another 111 feet going underground to stabilize it, which would mean it's 666 feet tall. Interesting. And if you measure the base, all square all around the base, it's 666 inches wide, or 55.5 feet wide. 666 all over this thing. This guy's got sixes all over him. So I am fully convinced that we're looking at the Antichrist right here. So let's see what's been happening in recent time regarding the idea of finding Nimrod. In 1999, the tomb of Osiris was found by an individual by the name of Dr. Zahi Hawass, one of the most world-renowned Egyptologists out there. He saw what looked like a well between the center pyramid and the Sphinx. But he began to suspect it was something more than just drinking water, that it was more than just a well. And so he pumped the water out. And this is what they found right there. If you look at the diagram there on the left, they came down into this chamber that had a tunnel going down even farther. Remember that the beast had 7 heads, right? And it says that the Antichrist is one of the 7. Well, you got this chamber here that has 6 sarcophagus places for sarcophagus to be. You see there's 3 right there on the one side. You got 1. There's 4 on the end. And then there's 2 on the other side. And where the other one would be, it's another tunnel. And so they go down even farther, and they find what's depicted, the artist rendition on the right, is the tomb of Osiris. This is so sci-fi. I mean, this truth is stranger than fiction these days. There was a moat of water surrounding a square island that had 4 pillars, one on each end. It had strange writing on it that I suspect was instructions for something. Inside that square island was another moat of water surrounding an island that had a very large stone sarcophagus on it. And this is their words, not mine. They described what was underneath that as the shaft of the bottomless pit. They found a body in that sarcophagus, but everybody agreed that it was not Osiris, that it appeared that it was tampered with. Somebody maybe put a body in there with the hopes of resurrection, but the body that they found in there appears to have been a later addition. So they ruled out the body that was in the sarcophagus, that said that was not Osiris. However, a few years later, in April of 2003, the tomb of Gilgamesh was found in the desert of Iraq. Coincidentally, 1 month before we started the military occupation phase of Iraq. And we all know that we went under pretense of finding weapons of mass destruction, right? But we all learned that that was false. But I submit that it may be true. We may have found the weapon of mass destruction, if in fact Gilgamesh is Nimrod. And you'll hear in a minute, I'm going to clip where Tom Horn and Steve Quayle are talking about this, talking about the fact that when they found this body, there was apparently in a remarkable state of preservation, and their primary objective was to extract DNA from it. This is April of 2003. And, oh, by the way, after we go into Iraq and set up the military occupation phase, the first thing our troops did was raid the Museum of Baghdad. Things that make you go, to quote Saturday Night Live, right? The great scholars of Saturday Night Live. Made me begin to wonder if there was, in fact, an Omega plan at work. And so, kind of following in Tom Horn's footsteps, my wife and I went to Washington, D.C. back in November, did a little poking around, having taken the red pill. When I was still under the influence of the blue pill, I didn't see anything. I see what people like David Barton might see, you know. See all the pretty pictures on the bottom? Christian heritage, right? I recommend you all watch Chris Pinto's documentaries, The Hidden Faith of Our Founding Fathers, Eye of the Phoenix, New Atlantis, Riddles in Stone. Check those out. Okay? Yeah, the lower pictures are real pretty pictures. They're real nice, look like Christian heritage. But the further up you look into, as Tom Horn called it, the womb of ISIS, the more sinister it gets. You have the frieze of American history there, and yeah, you do have depictions of United States of America history on there. But as you keep looking, yeah, Tom showed this last night. You have the Aztec calendar stone. You're like, okay, you got Revolutionary War, Civil War, you know, the Wright brothers' first flight. Aztec calendar stone. What? What is that? And then you keep looking up, and you get the 72 binding utility pentagrams surrounding the apotheosis of George Washington, where George is depicted as a god beside Neptune and Minerva and Vulcan and Mercury. And so I asked the lady that was our tour guide, I said, when was that painting done? She said 1865. And I thought, that sounds familiar. Isn't that the year Abraham Lincoln died? And she said, yeah. In fact, he was the first president to undergo what's called the lying in state ceremony. Remember what Tom talked about last night? About the presidents, when they die, they go to represent Osiris, and the new presidents come in to represent Horus. Well, when they physically die, they bring their body into the womb of Isis underneath the apotheosis and leave it there for a little while. And every president since Lincoln has done so, has gone through the lying in state ceremony. So you're like, oh, okay, that's really interesting. Yeah, does America have a date with destiny in 2012? Tom talked a little bit about this last night. I'm going to kind of pick up where he left off. And this is, again, from his book, Apollyon Rising 2012, and I did some more research on this myself, to see what, in fact, was being depicted there, and why was the Aztec calendar stone involved. And he points out in his book that if you look at the pyramid, it has 72 stones arranged in 13 steps that appear to represent a unit of time called a Khatoon, which is a 19.7-year period of time. Beginning in 1756, going 13 times 19.7, the base of the pyramid says 1776. That would be the end of the first cycle of 13 Khatoons. The last one ending in 2012. And so, okay, there appears to be, you have to understand something about symbols. Symbols conceal from people who don't have eyes to see, and they reveal for people who do have eyes to see. Well, on the revealing side of things, that means all of the iconography contained within a symbol has to harmonize with itself, because they're revealing a message. So whatever iconography is inside of a symbol, it's all going to agree with itself, right? So we'll talk about the symbol on our Great Seal, on both sides of it, actually, because Manly P. Hall had some interesting things to say about the front of the Great Seal. We all think that's the American Eagle, right? But we know Masons designed all this stuff, and Manly P. Hall is one of the most prolific Masonic writers. He says, aha, no, you guys think it's an eagle. No. That is a conventionalized phoenix. It's a stylized phoenix. Well, if you look through the mythology, of course, dying and resurrecting bird, right? In the Egyptian mythology, the phoenix is the Bennu, which is the soul bird of Osiris, the dying and resurrecting sun god. And so Manly P. Hall is telling you, no, this is a conventionalized, stylized phoenix. We just passing it off for you guys so you think it's an eagle. Reveal, right, for those who have eyes to see, and conceal from those who don't. Interesting thing about that, remember I said that all the iconography within a symbol has to harmonize with itself? What's in the beak of the eagle? A little banner that says what? E pluribus unum. What were you taught? What does that mean? Out of many, one. Oh, 13 colonies, one nation. 50 states, one nation. Many ethnicities, one nation. Well, that's not what the iconography is telling you, though. If you harmonize all the iconography, there's 13s all over this thing, first of all. 13 pieces of Osiris. You want to know why there's 13 colonies, 13 stripes, 13 stars? Go on history.org and look up who really designed the so-called Betsy Ross flag. History.org says Betsy Ross, there's no evidence whatsoever to suggest that she had anything to do with it. It's a myth. That another guy, I think his name was Francis Hopkinson or something like that, was involved with it, and he also had a hand in designing the Great Seal. Oh! Everything starts to make some sense now, where all these 13s are coming from. So therefore, harmonizing everything that we see here, it appears to be saying, to me anyway, that e pluribus unum means one guy represented by many names. Many gods representing one. Nimrod. Okay, let's continue. Because that little doohickey's on the back of your dollar bill. I don't even like carrying them around anymore. I call them Nimrods. I really don't. I think it's a talisman, quite frankly. If you have a seal, like it's like a quarter, you know, it's got an image on one side, image on the other side, but you split it, we read left to right, right? Well, you would think it would be as it's depicted on the right side there, with the eagle on the left and the pyramid on the right. But yet on our dollar bill, it's the other way around. And that Tom mentioned last night, Henry Wallace and FDR, 32nd degree Masons, and there's another guy involved, a guru, Nicholas Roerich, and these guys conspired together and FDR, and you can go on like Wikipedia or whatever and look at the history of the dollar and see the original design did have it with the eagle on the left and the pyramid on the right, and you see FDR's signature suggesting that it be changed so that the pyramid's on the left and the eagle's on the right. So I began to think, what are they trying to say with this thing? You know, what's the iconography saying? Charles Thompson was one of the creators of the Great Seal, and he was a big fan of the Roman poet Virgil. So he put a lot of these things on that Great Seal, like some of the Latin phrases we see there. Annuet coeptis means favors undertakings. Well, that's an incomplete statement. Who favors our undertakings, and what's he favoring? Well, the all-seeing eye in the middle there should give us a clue between annuet and coeptis, right? But he was a fan of Virgil, so let's look at some of the writings of Virgil and see maybe where he got that phrase from. If this is going to work, okay, here we go. Here's a writing of Virgil's right here. All-powerful Jupiter. Jupiter is a Roman version of Zeus. Zeus, according to Revelation chapter 2, apparently is another embodiment for Lucifer. The seat of Satan, referred to in Revelation chapter 2, was the altar of Zeus in Pergamum. So, all-powerful Jupiter, Zeus, Lucifer. Assent to my bold attempt. That's the Latin phrase right there translated into assent to my bold attempt. That's where he derived the Latin from for annuit coeptus. Let's continue. For the other phrase that's on there in Latin, novus ordo seclorum, which means a new order of the ages. Where did he get that from? Well, he got that from this writing of Virgil. I'm going to go ahead and read the whole thing here because it plays into what Tom talked about last night with the Cumaean prophecies. Muses of Sicily, let me say a little more grandly. Now the last age of the Cumaean prophecy begins. The great roll call of the centuries is born anew. It's from that phrase right there in Latin that he derived novus ordo seclorum. Now virgin justice returns old Saturn's reign, with a new breed of men sent down from heaven. Only favor the child who's born pure Lucina, under whom the first race of iron shall end, and a golden age, or golden race, rise up throughout the world. Now your Apollo reigns. What did Revelation 9:11 say? Who's the Antichrist? Okay. He will take on divine life, and he will see gods mingled with heroes. And I began to wonder if that's not what's being talked about in Daniel 2:43, where it says they, who's they? Shall mingle their seed with the seed of men, and be seen by them and rule a peaceful world with his Father's powers. Putting it all together, this is, again, this is not gospel. This is thus thinketh Rob. This is what I think the back of your dollar bill is saying, reading left to right. Zeus/Satan favors our undertakings, that which we do under Osiris's watchful eye. An undertaking that started in 1776 and will be completed in 2012. At that time, we will usher in the new order of the ages. It is in you, O Lucifer, that we put our trust to raise up your son. Now, I put Lucifer there because it says, in God we trust. There's nothing on that dollar that harmonizes with Scripture. When people in politics, especially, politicians, say they serve the God of the Bible, I think we need to ask, which God? Because there's a lot of them in the Bible. Are we talking about the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob? Or are we talking about all the other ones he says, don't have any other ones before me? Looking at all the iconography on this talisman here, this dollar bill, I believe that it's talking about Lucifer, because there's nothing on here representing the God of Abraham, Jacob, Isaac, and Jacob. Like a phoenix rising out of the ashes of death under the sign of Saturn, Apollo Nimrod will rise again. Thus, the one false god, represented by many names, shall reign anew. That's what I think has been put in circulation all around the world. That is my belief on that. Going to see what Jesus had to say concerning the last days and the Antichrist, he gives us some warnings. He says, then if any man shall say unto you, lo, here is Christ, or there, believe it not. For there shall arise false Christs and false prophets, and shall shew great signs and wonders, insomuch that if it were possible, they shall deceive the very elect. I like this one. Behold, I have told you before. That's King James. Some of the other ones say, I'm telling you this in advance. It appears to be saying, hey guys, pay attention. I'm telling you something you really need to be thinking about here. Right? Then he says, wherefore, if they shall say unto you, behold, he is in the desert. Where was Gilgamesh found? Desert of Iraq. Go not forth. Behold, is in the secret chambers. What secret chamber was found in 1999? The tomb of Osiris. Believe it not. Then he tells us what we should believe. He says, for as the lightning cometh out of the east and shineth even unto the west, so shall also the coming of the Son of Man be. That's what we're supposed to be looking for, right? Then he makes this really odd statement. He says, for wheresoever the carcass is, there will the eagles be gathered together. Huh? That's weird. A lot of people think of eagle as a bird of prey, going after live things, right? Some of your English translations translated it as vulture. I think eagle is correct. And especially if you think about, take the red pill, right? Go to Washington, D.C., walk out of the train station and look up. The roof of the train station in Washington, D.C. is lined with pagan gods. You got Zeus way over on the left. You got these two eagles, so-called eagles, over on the right. Look at what it says between these so-called eagles. Let all the ends thou aimest at be, thy countries, thy gods, and truths be noble. And the nobleness that lies in other men, sleeping but never dead, will rise in majesty to meet thine own. Huh? Okay. That's interesting. As we were winding down our trip in Washington, D.C., I happened to look over. We were walking down the street, and I saw two very large eagles, bearing in mind what I think the eagles are representing, perched on top of two pillars looking down at something. So we said, let's go see what they're looking at. So we walked down and looked to see what the eagles were looking at. They're looking down on this very large sculpture of a bearded god, a giant bearded god, coming up out of the National Harbor. And it's called The Awakening. What? Oh boy, this is crazy, man. Yeah, let's look at some things regarding the awakening. These are some the pyramid texts. Utterance 5:12 in the pyramid text talking about Osiris. Lead those who are in the abyss and command the gods. Rise yourself up. Hasten to your spirit. Utterance 5:32. Raise yourself, O Osiris. You live, you live. Raise yourself up. Or how about this one? Utterance 5:7-7. Come, my child, says Atum. Come to us, say the gods, to you, Osiris, who lives because the gods have ordained that he live. Or this one here from the Book of the Dead. I am yesterday, and I am today, and I have the power to be born a second time. These are all very ancient texts written about a guy that's said to awaken one day. And we got two eagles, the Bennu, the sole bird of Osiris, looking down on this large bearded god coming up out of the National Harbor. Things that make you go, Manly P. Hall, again, he says, the dying God shall rise again. The secret room in the house of the hidden places shall be rediscovered. The pyramid shall again stand as the ideal emblem of solidarity, inspiration, aspiration, resurrection, and regeneration. Keep that in mind. I'm going to show you a video in a few minutes. It's going to kind of summarize what I've been saying here. It's kind of the last 20 years of what I consider the Omega Plan, and I put a question mark after it because I'm just speculating, but some very interesting things are said. So pay attention to what he just said here when you see Obama in a pyramid in Egypt. America's role in the last days. That's something a lot of people want to know. First, I'm going to ask you to please not question my patriotism. I'm third generation Army, was a Boy Scout, did my time in the service for 8 years. I love my country. But I can't deny the research. It appears to me when I look and ask the question, is America in prophecy? I think America's right here in Matthew 24:28. And if that's true, as a nation, we're playing on the wrong side. Where he talks about wheresoever the carcass is, there will the eagles be gathered together, it occurred to me, wow, our military uniforms are covered with eagles from the top of our head to the bottom of our feet. Eagles on our hats, eagles on our patches, eagles on our buttons, eagles everywhere. It's an American symbol is the eagle. Did Jesus look forward in time and see them pull a body out of the desert, load it into a sarcophagus in the sands of Egypt in a secret chamber with a bunch of eagle-wearing people gathered around it? I don't know, but bear that in mind as you watch this video here. They say a picture is worth 1,000 words. In my line of work, I like to say, if a picture is worth 1,000 words, how much more can you say at 30 frames per second? So, seeing as that I don't have a whole lot more time to speak, I'm going to let the video do a lot of talking here. Pay attention to everything is said, because I believe it is showing in the mouth of our own presidents and other news reports what I think is an Omega Plan leading to everything that I just talked about.
Tell us, when shall these things be, and what shall be the sign of thy coming and of the end of the world? And Jesus answered and said unto them, Take heed that no man deceive you.
On August the 17th, 1991, Desert Shield became Desert Storm. The conflict was witnessed by millions through the eye of CNN and the BBC, showing propaganda of the systematic eradication of Saddam's forces by a coalition far superior in technological, political, and economic power. The orchestrators of the war were by no means strangers to controlling major world events. In fact, they have done so for centuries. From the shadows, they have engineered every major war, revolution, and recession. They control everything you read, everything you hear, and everything you see. They have managed to indoctrinate an entire populace to their way of thinking and have infiltrated key positions in places of authority. And it is from the shadows that they have created a new political order, a new economic order, and more sinister, a new religious order. Their ultimate aim is total global domination, and they will stop at nothing to reach their goal, the goal that was outlined in a speech given by former President of the United States, George Bush.
What is at stake is more than one small country. It is a big idea, a new world order.
We talk so much about dispelling myths. How about confirming one? What is this?
Susie, this is the tomb of Osiris.
The god of the underworld. This once extravagant mausoleum, a moat with 4 pillars engraved with hieroglyphics constructed thousands of years ago, was intended to be a shrine for the keeper of the afterlife.
Polls have just now closed in 6 additional states, representing 66 electoral votes.
We must follow no other course. Now it is a seed upon the wind, taking root in many nations. We will confront weapons of mass destruction. We will build our defenses beyond challenge, lest weakness invite challenge. This work continues. The story goes on, and an angel still rides in the whirlwind and directs this storm.
Heard the first one come in. I didn't know what it was. It sounded like a missile.
Oh my God, Ed, another plane just hit the World Trade Center.
Wait, oh my God, oh my God, the building fell.
We have no idea what caused this.
Let us never tolerate outrageous conspiracy theories concerning the attacks of September the 11th. Malicious lies that attempt to shift the blame away from the terrorists themselves, away from the guilty.
On the morning of September 11, 2001, 19 men armed with box cutters, directed by a man on dialysis in a cave fortress halfway around the world using a satellite phone and a laptop, directed the most sophisticated penetration of the most heavily defended airspace in the world, overpowering the passengers and the military combat-trained pilots on 4 commercial aircraft before flying those planes wildly off course for over an hour without being molested by a single fighter interceptor. These 19 hijackers, devout religious fundamentalists who like to drink alcohol, snort cocaine, and live with pink-haired strippers, managed to knock down 3 buildings with 2 planes in New York, while in Washington, a pilot who couldn't handle a single-engine Cessna was able to fly a 757 in an 8,000-foot descending 270-degree corkscrew turn to come exactly level with the ground, hitting the Pentagon in the Budget Analyst Office where DoD staffers were working on the mystery of the $2.3 trillion that Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld had announced missing from the Pentagon's coffers in a press conference the day before, on September 10th, 2001. Luckily, the news anchors knew who did it within minutes.
Osama bin Laden.
The pundits knew within hours.
Osama bin Laden.
The administration knew within the day.
Terrorists who committed these acts and those who harbored them.
And the evidence literally fell into the FBI's lap.
That a hijacker's passport was found blocks from the World Trade Center crash site, if you can believe that.
But for some reason, a bunch of crazy conspiracy theorists demanded an investigation into the greatest attack on American soil in history. That investigation was delayed, underfunded, set up to fail, a conflict of interest, and a cover-up from start to finish. It was based on testimony extracted through torture, the records of which were destroyed. It failed to mention the existence of WTC-7, Able Danger, P-TECH, Sibel Edmonds, OBL and the CIA, and the drills of hijacked aircraft being flown into buildings that were being simulated at the precise same time that those events were actually happening. It was lied to by the Pentagon, the CIA, the Bush administration, and as for Bush and Cheney, well, no one knows what they told it because they testified in secret, off the record, not under oath, and behind closed doors. It didn't bother to look at who funded the attacks because that question is ultimately of little practical significance. Still, the 9/11 Commission did brilliantly answering all of the questions the public had, except most of the victims' family members' questions, and pinned blame on all the people responsible, although no one so much as lost their job, determining the attacks were
failure of imagination.
Because
Nobody in our government, at least, and I don't think the prior government that could envision flying airplanes into buildings.
Except the Pentagon, FEMA, NORAD, and the NRO. The DIA destroyed 2.5 terabytes of data on Able Danger, but that's okay because it probably wasn't important. NIST has classified the data that they used for their model of WTC-7's collapse, but that's okay because knowing how they made their model of the collapse would jeopardize public safety. Osama bin Laden lived in a cave fortress in the hills of Afghanistan, but somehow got away. Then he was hiding out in Tora Bora, but somehow got away. Then he lived in Abbottabad for years, taunting the most comprehensive intelligence dragnet, employing the most sophisticated technology in the history of the world for a decade, releasing video after video with complete impunity and getting younger and younger as he did so, before finally being found in a daring SEAL team raid which wasn't recorded on video, in which he didn't resist or use his wife as a human shield, and in which these crack Special Forces operatives panicked and killed this unarmed man, supposedly the best source of intelligence about those dastardly terrorists on the entire planet. Then they dumped his body in the ocean before telling anyone about it. Then a couple dozen of that team's members died in a helicopter crash in Afghanistan. You will never ever express doubts about any part of this story to anyone. Ever.
Imagine the startling proposition that the Nephilim, the giants, the mighty men of old, the gods and children of the Watchers, could somehow rise up, could somehow be reconstituted inside of a body. And, of course, I've discussed with you before my theory that one of the greatest legends in history could be a record of that having actually happened. And I'm referring to Nimrod, who some scholars also identify as Gilgamesh of Sumerian fame, Apollo of Greek fame, Osiris of Egyptian fame. And this Gilgamesh was a giant who a lot of people didn't even believe was anything more than myth until his grave marker was found a few years back. And then, according to some people, the military swooped in and took possession and control of that dig.
Hey, Tom, I want to interject something. I talked to a special operations general who was there when Gilgamesh's remains, and his words were he was in a state of remarkable preservation, okay? He said they have Gilgamesh's remains. So if they have Gilgamesh and he is Nimrod, they got it. And the whole point was to extract the DNA.
When the Iraqi regime fell in April 2003, the Iraqi Museum in Baghdad and museums in other provinces such as Mosul, Basra, and Babel were exposed to theft for 2 consecutive days. The theft was carried out by local and international networks as well as Iraqi and Arab agents. It is estimated that 170,000 artifacts were stolen, 15,000 of which have no registration records. The most important of these artifacts are the Sumerian cuneiforms, which represents the philosophy of life and death.
Many date back to Mesopotamian times, more than 4,000 years ago.
Artifacts pertaining to the civilizations of the Sumerians, Babylonians, and Chaldeans, and others that go back thousands of years in history, were taken away from the land of the 2 rivers.
In addition, entire book collections from certain historic eras disappeared from the National Library, thus negatively affecting Iraq's wealth of civilization and culture.
One must also mention that some artifacts were stolen and sent to Israel via the American forces.
American troops stood by as Iraq's heritage was plundered. One memorable moment that week was when Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld dismissed the looting in Baghdad as unimportant.
Freedom's untidy, and free people are free to make mistakes and commit crimes and do bad things.
Many of the looters knew which objects they were looking for and where to find them. In other words, they were insiders.
Investigations revealed that the main metal gate of the storage rooms was opened. It was not opened by force, which means a person who knew where the key was participated in the theft.
J.P. Morgan Chase Bank led a 13-bank consortium to establish the Central Bank of Iraq. De La Rue was brought in to print up the new Iraqi dinar. This currency has some of the most anti-counterfeit measures of any other currency on the planet, and yet it is completely worthless. Its current value is approximately $1,163 to $1 US. But from 1982 until about 1993, 1 dinar was worth $3.22.
There are secrets that George W. Bush guards at least as carefully as any entrusted to a president. Secrets he's forbidden to share even with the vice president. Secrets he's held ever since his days at Yale, where in his senior year, like his father and his grandfather, he belonged to Skull and Bones, the elite secret society whose members include some of the most powerful men of the 20th century. President Bush has tapped 5 fellow Bonesmen to join his administration. Most recently, the head of the Securities and Exchange Commission, William Donaldson, Skull and Bones, 1953. Bones is not restricted to Republicans. Yet another Bonesman has his eye on the Oval Office. Senator John Kerry, Democrat, Skull and Bones, 1966.
You both were members of Skull and Bones, a secret society at Yale. What does that tell us?
Not much, because it's a secret.
Is there a secret handshake? Is there a secret code?
I wish there were something secret I could manifest.
322, secret number?
There are all kinds of secrets, Tim, but one thing is not a secret. I disagree with this president's direction that he's taking the country. We can do a better job, and I intend to do it.
You were both in Skull and Bones, the secret society.
It's so secret we can't talk about it.
What does that mean for America? The conspiracy theorists are going to go
I'm
wild.
sure they are. I don't know. I haven't seen the website.
Number 322?
First of all, he's not the nominee, and look, I look forward.
Are you prepared to lose?
No, I'm not going to lose.
Saddam, Saddam, Saddam,
Saddam,
Saddam, Saddam, Saddam, Saddam, Saddam, Saddam,
Saddam, Saddam, Saddam Hussein.
War and danger. Continuing danger.
Hour of danger.
Very, very dangerous world. The evil terrorists. 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 Terrorists.
Terrorist, 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 terrorist.
Terrorists. 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 Terrorists.
Dramatic changes now beginning to occur. John Kerry with 77 electoral votes and George Bush with 66.
These men are like this. The only thing that unifies them are Skull and Bones. Skull and Bones will still keep control of the presidency.
By our efforts, we have lit a fire as well. A fire in the minds of men. It warms those who feel its power. It burns those who fight its progress. And one day, this untamed fire of freedom will reach the darkest corners of our world.
The Bible says that Iraq, which was known in the Bible days as Babylon, will not only emerge in the last days, it will emerge as the wealthiest, most peaceful, most powerful nation on the face of the planet. So the question is, how do we get from the chaos that there has been over the last few years to the wealthiest country on the planet in the last days? Something must get better.
Right.
So people ask me, are we making Iraq safe for the Antichrist or safe for democracy? And it's a little bit of both.
We cannot continue to rely only on our military in order to achieve the national security objectives that we've set. We've got to have a civilian national security force that's just as powerful, just as strong, just as well-funded. And those who tell us that we can't, we will respond with that timeless creed that sums up the spirit of a people. Yes, we can. If you say, with profound gratitude and great humility, I accept your nomination for presidency of the United States. All across America, something is stirring. It's been a whirlwind of activity these first 100 days. Finally, I believe that my next 100 days will be so successful I will be able to complete them in 72 days. And on the 73rd day, I will rest.
What did the President and the Pope talk about this morning?
The Vatican positions, you know, don't fall into the usual left and right of American politics. The Pope, for example, is for stronger world government. And he just issued an encyclical, a sort of Vatican position paper, calling for much stronger regulation of the financial world. And at the same time, of course, the Pope is opposed to abortion and stem cell research, which Mr. Obama favors.
E pluribus unum.
That was Latin. It's what's inscribed on a quarter.
Out of many, one.
Of course, the visual highlight was the president touring the pyramids, outside and in.
Purification, mummification.
Self-identification.
That looks like me. Look at those ears.
Separated at birth from a hieroglyphic, but the president's guide saw another resemblance.
Mr. President, you look like King Tut.
I've been told.
Yes, it's true.
He should know about King Tut. Dr. Sahi Hawass oversaw scans of Tut's mummy that produced this likeness. The president's trip inspired Egyptians to display decorations calling Obama the new King Tut of the world. But even the new King Tut couldn't budge a pyramid. Still, it's good practice for trying to push peace in the Mideast.
Scientists from all over the world are trying to figure out what caused a mysterious blue light to spiral in the sky over Norway on Wednesday.
Early yesterday morning, just before dawn, this appeared in the Norwegian sky. A blue light, small at first, growing into a spiral, and then disappearing into what appeared to be a black hole.
Thousands of Norwegians bombarded the Meteorological Institute to ask what that light could have possibly been. Some feared it could have been a meteor, others a black hole, and there are even those that thought it could be aliens.
December 21st, 2010, I looked up and I saw a decapitated blood red head, looked like, floating over the shoulders of Orion at 2:22 in the morning. Oh, by the way, 2:22 in the morning Central Standard Time is 3:22 in the morning Eastern Standard Time. 322 is the coveted number of the Skull and Bone Society, of which the whole Bush family has been strongly associated with, as was Kerry. 2 Illuminist, 322. What's that? A skull? A decapitated head on top of a pile of bones? 322. What was happening in Iraq at that very moment? Iraq had just announced the foundation of its newly formed government. And the entire planet, you could look this up for yourself, shook. The seismographic monitors that check earthquake activity around the world, every one of them went into the black that night. What's going on? I don't know.
After nearly 9 years, our war in Iraq ends this month. Today I'm proud to welcome Prime Minister Maliki, the elected leader of a sovereign, self-reliant, and democratic Iraq. In the coming years, it's estimated that Iraq's economy will grow even faster than China's or India's.
Here's my dinars. I got them.
Well, you know, look, I
from the Trade Bank of Iraq, the only ATM in the country.
Look, this is a country that's resource-based, that obviously has tremendous aid by the U.S., but could be very self-sufficient with all these oil companies that we've been talking about that are exploring, they're about to explore there. And so I told my viewer, look, I can't fight it. I would like to know how best to get it, and it would really be great if, you know, these guys set up these ETFs all the time. How about an ETF to play the dinar? That would really be the best way to go.
For the first time in 2 decades, Iraq is scheduled to host the next Arab League summit, and what a powerful message that will send throughout the Arab world. And finally, we're partnering for regional security. For just as Iraq has pledged not to interfere in other nations must not interfere in Iraq. Iraq's sovereignty must be respected. And let us never forget those who gave us this chance. The untold number of Iraqis who've given their lives. More than 1 million Americans, military and civilian, who have served in Iraq. Nearly 4,500 fallen Americans who gave their last full measure of devotion. Tens of thousands of wounded warriors, and so many inspiring military families.
People ask me, are we making Iraq safe for the Antichrist or safe for democracy? And it's a little bit of both.
This is an extraordinary achievement. Nearly 9 years in the making. We're building a new partnership between our nations.
America continues to maintain a high presence in the country, with the largest U.S. embassy in the world located in the capital Baghdad, with 15,000 members of staff.
Before they leave, U.S. forces will have to transfer dozens of bases to the Iraqis and dispose of or ship out thousands of vehicles.
Sometimes it's too cumbersome to bring a lot of this equipment back to the U.S., so a lot of it's left on bases. We're leaving over 500 military bases to the Iraqis, both to the Iraqi security forces and also to the government.
This is a happy occasion for all of us. It is considered one of the most important days for the Iraqi army and Iraqis, which is the day of handing over Sania base from the friendly side to the Iraqi army.
Your zodiac sign was determined by Babylonians based on what constellation the sun was in on the day you were born. But astronomers at the Minnesota Planetarium Society point out things have changed over thousands of years. The Earth has shifted on its axis and shifted us up one sign on the zodiac wheel.
Right between November 29th and December 17th, there is a new sign. It is Ophiuchus. The constellation is a dude wrestling a snake.
Birds, fish, and all kinds of creatures just dropping dead. 8,000 dead turtledoves in Italy. Hundreds of birds dead in Rockwell, Texas. 500 red-winged blackbirds in Louisiana. 3,000 dead red-winged blackbirds in Arkansas. Several hundred dead in Kentucky. On the fish, several hundred snapper fish in New Zealand, thousands of dead fish in Florida, 40,000 devil crabs in the UK, 80,000 drumfish in Arkansas, 2 million spotted croakers in Maryland in the last 2 weeks. This is all a sign of the apocalypse.
But as the days of Noe were, so shall also the coming of the Son of Man be.
Plans to allow scientists to create embryos that are part human and part animal are set for approval by the official regulator in Britain.
There shall be signs in the sun, and in the moon, and in the stars. And upon the earth, distress of nations with perplexity. The sea and the waves roaring. Men's hearts failing them for fear, and for looking after those things which are coming on the earth. For the powers of heaven shall be shaken.
Look at the size of this thing as seen from space. Records fell.
The biggest snowfall in recorded history.
100 million people will be impacted by this storm. That's 1/3 the population of the United States.
Then said he unto them, Nation shall rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom. And great earthquakes shall be in divers places, and famines and pestilences, and fearful sights and great signs shall there be from heaven. And except those days should be shortened, there should no flesh be saved. But for the elect's sake, those days shall be shortened.
Thank you. Just got a couple minutes and we'll wrap up here. That video should help us understand why the scriptures say that now is the time of salvation. If you don't know in whom your hope lies, don't leave this building without settling that issue. Because most of the stuff you saw there was just last year. And if everything that the speakers have been talking about, the potential for something happening, everything seems to be pointing to December 21st of this year, 2012. I don't know what's going to happen. There's an awful lot of stuff pointing to it. Here's an interesting thing to consider. If you've seen this picture before, and think about what Tom Horn and Chris Putnam have been talking about with regard to Petrus Romanus, is this a foreshadowing of the false prophet in the image of the beast? That's a sculpture called the Resurrection. I don't know about you, but my Bible doesn't say anything about Jesus looking like that. Sculpted in 1977 by a guy named Fazzini. It's supposedly Jesus coming out of a nuclear crater. Okay. Is that the false prophet in front of the Antichrist? I don't know. But I'm not going to leave you in fear. I'm going to close with this. Fear not. As I started to look more into Osiris, you see this imagery right here is how his name is spelt in Egyptian hieroglyphs. Osiris, that's the iconography that represents his name. And EgyptianMyths.net says the name Osiris is the Greek corruption of the Egyptian name Asur or Usur. There are several possibilities as to what this name means. The strength of the eye is one. Another is he sees the throne, or he who has his eye on the throne. Sounds like the five I wills to me. Right there. That's what Osiris' name means, but I'm going to show you something really cool here. My wife and I started taking Hebrew classes about 1.5 years ago and started understanding Hebrew. This is a chart from a guy named Dr. Joel Young, and his website is forhisglory.org. He shows that every Hebrew letter has a numerical value, and also every letter has multiple meanings for the letter itself. And there's an idiom that says if every Hebrew letter has 7 meanings, then every Hebrew word has 70. Because there's not only the meaning of the word, but the 2 or 3 letter sheresh that makes up the word, the root of it, as well as the letters that comprise the words. So I really fallen in love with Jesus' given name, Yeshua, in Hebrew. Looking at the definitions of the letters that make up his name, this is one possible way you could interpret his name, reading right to left. Yod, one of the definitions is hand. Shin, one of the definitions is destroy. Vav, establish. And Ein, eye. Putting it together, it appears to be saying the hand that destroys the establishment of the eye. Thank you very much. We win in the end.